Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're focusing on something really central to the Methodist Church, the role and responsibilities of its ministers.
Yeah, it's a topic that comes up a lot.
Definitely. And we want this to be a sort of go-to guide. We're drawing everything directly from the Methodist Book of Order, the 2016 edition. That's our main source.
The foundational text, really, it outlines so much.
Exactly. So our mission, if you like, is to unpack what it truly means to be a Methodist minister, just trying to offer some clarity, some context for everyone in our church communities ready to jump in.
Let's do it. I think it's key to remember the Book of Order isn't just rules. It explains the why behind the structures, too. It really helps you understand how the church functions.
Absolutely. And right at the start, it talks about this idea of a divine call. It's not just, deciding on a career.
Not at all. The Book of Order is very clear. The office of Christian ministry depends on God's call first.
And how does that become visible? How do we know?
Well, it says it's shown through things like spiritual gifts, grace, and importantly, the fruit, the positive impact someone has. It's about seeing evidence of God working through them.
Okay, so it starts with God's initiative and the person's response. But that's not the whole story, is it?
No, that personal calling needs to be recognized by the wider church. That's crucial.
Right. The community aspect.
Exactly. And that recognition happens formally through ordination. This involves the laying on of hands, prayer for the Holy Spirit. It's a significant act.
So ordination isn't just a ceremony. It's the church basically saying, we see this call too.
Precisely. It's the church's official confirmation, setting that person apart for ministerial service. It's a collective discernment.
A partnership, then, between the individual and the church. Okay, so once ordained, the Book of Order uses this specific language, stewards in the household of God and shepherds of his flock. That sounds quite poetic, but what does it actually mean?
It's a really rich description. Stewards points to responsibility, doesn't it? Managing the household, caring for the church's resources, its life, ensuring things run well spiritually and practically.
Oversight.
Yes. And shepherds focuses more on the people guiding, nurturing, protecting the congregation's spiritual well-being, caring for the flock.
So it's this dual role of managing and caring.
Exactly.
Right.
And the book notes that for some, this calling is their primary occupation. They take a principal, a directing part in these duties.
Makes sense. Now, something that feels characteristically Methodist is this emphasis on the universal priesthood of believers. How does that fit with having specific ordained ministers? Seems like there could be a tension there.
That's a really important point, and the Book of Order addresses it directly. The idea is that all believers have access to God through faith, and all share in the gifts of the Spirit.
So ministry isn't just for the ministers.
Right. Ordained ministers don't possess a priesthood that's fundamentally different in kind from any other believers. They don't have an exclusive claim on preaching or pastoral care. These are shared ministries across the whole church body.
Okay, so it's not an us and them situation.
Not at all. There's a great quote included, drawing on Scripture. It is one and the same Spirit who does all this. As the Spirit wishes, different gifts are given to each person. It really underscores that shared giftedness, even while recognizing specific roles.
That clarifies things a lot.
Yeah.
But there are some things reserved for ordained ministers, aren't there? What about the sacraments?
Yes, that's the main distinction highlighted in the Wesleyan tradition, as reflected in the Book of Order. The actual celebration of the sacraments, Holy Communion, baptism, is seen as a specific function entrusted to those who are ordained.
And the church gets to decide who that is.
Correct. Through that process of discernment and ordination we talked about, the church decides whom it ordains for this specific sacred task.
Okay. But, you often see lay people helping with communion, handing out the bread and wine. How does that work?
Good question. The Book of Order allows for that. The ordained minister presides over the sacrament, but they can definitely invite laypersons to assist in distributing the elements.
Ah, so it's about assisting, not presiding.
Exactly. There's a slight caveat for probationers, ministers, still in their training period. They need their superintendent's permission before inviting lay assistants.
Got it. That makes sense. So, moving beyond sacraments, what are the other core duties? Pastoral care seems huge.
Absolutely central. Ministers provide pastoral care within their assigned circuits. And maybe we should clarify circuit quickly.
Good idea.
It's basically a group of local Methodist churches served by a team of ministers and lay leaders. So within that circuit, the minister's job is to nurture the spiritual life of the congregations.
And that involves more than just visiting people, right?
Oh, yes. The book outlines pastoral, preaching, teaching, or educative, as it calls it, and administrative functions. It's quite broad.
Are there any differences, say, for part-time ministers?
Yes, there are a few specific limitations mentioned. Part-time ministers can't serve as the circuit superintendent, that's the lead minister in the circuit. They also can't preside over the quarterly meeting, which is a key circuit business meeting, or be elected as a bishop.
Okay. And what if a minister needs to do something official, like conduct a wedding in a different circuit?
They need to get the nod from the superintendent of that other circuit. It's about courtesy and good order across the connection, the wider church structure.
Right, maintaining communication and structure. Which brings us to accountability. How does someone even become a minister? It sounds like quite a process.
It is. It's designed to be thorough. Candidates are nominated, and then there's an examination process.
What do they look for?
A whole range of things. Their spiritual life and commitment, how involved they are in the church already, their moral character, naturally, their grasp of Methodist beliefs, and how the church works, doctrine and discipline. And interestingly, if they're married, the spouse's attitude towards the calling is also considered.
Wow, that's quite holistic. It really emphasizes the seriousness of the role.
It does. It's not just about skills, but about the whole person and their context.
And once someone gets through that, what are they committing to? Are there specific undertakings?
Yes, several key ones. They agree to follow the church's laws and discipline, to accept the appointments or stations they're given.
So agreeing to go where the church sends them.
Essentially, yes, within the stationing process. They also commit not to undermine the church, not to speak against its doctrines, its ministers, its practices. It's about loyalty and constructive participation.
And if things go wrong, if a minister doesn't uphold these standards or causes problems?
There are processes for that, too. The Book of Order outlines how complaints can be brought if a minister is, say, creating division, publicly contradicting church teachings, or falls into sin. There's a disciplinary framework to ensure accountability.
So it's not just a calling, it's a role with real responsibilities and accountability structures.
Absolutely. Ministers are accountable to God, certainly, but also to the church through these established means.
How do ministers fit into the day-to-day running and decision-making of the church, like the various meetings?
They're automatically members of key bodies. At the local church level, the leaders' meeting. At the circuit level, the quarterly meeting. And at the wider regional level, the synod.
What's their specific role in something like the circuit quarterly meeting?
It's quite significant. For instance, they vote on whether to approve candidates for ministry who are being put forward. They also play a key part, along with lay circuit stewards, in the process of inviting other ministers to come and serve in that circuit.
Ah, so they're involved in bringing new leadership in. And you mentioned stationing earlier, how ministers get appointed. How does that actually work?
It's a careful process. Circuits can express interest in a particular minister, sort of an invitation, but the final placement, the stationing, is managed by a district stationing committee.
So it's not just up to the local church.
No, the committee looks at the needs of all the churches in the district, the gifts of the available ministers, and works to find the best fit across the board. It's a connectional system, aiming for fairness and effectiveness everywhere.
A balancing act, it sounds like. What about connections beyond the local or regional? Does the Book of Order say anything about that?
It touches on a few things. For example, if a minister wants to travel and minister outside the formal Methodist connection, they generally need the bishop's approval.
Okay.
It also mentions situations where sometimes a minister might not be appointed to a specific church by the central connectional executive and outlines the process around that. And there are procedures if a minister feels called to work for another organization temporarily, a second vizment, which requires various levels of approval.
So lots of layers ensuring things align with the church's overall mission.
Yes, it shows how interconnected everything is.
Now, we haven't talked much about money, but the book does mention that circuit stewards, those key lay financial officers, pay the ministers stipends and allowances. That points to a practical relationship, doesn't it?
It certainly does. While the focus here is the role, this reminds us of the practical structures that support ministry. Ministers rely on the generosity and stewardship of the church members, managed through these structures.
And implicitly, there are ethical expectations running through all of this.
Definitely. It connects back to the broader Methodist ethos that applies to everyone, but especially leaders. Things like John Wesley's general rules, doing no harm, doing good, and attending upon all the ordinances of God. These ethical principles underpin everything a minister does.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Based on the Book of Order, what are the absolute key takeaways about Methodist ministers?
Well, fundamentally, they're seen as called by God. That's the starting point.
Right. Then recognized and set apart by the church through ordination.
Yes. They serve as both stewards, managing church life, and shepherds, caring for the people.
But importantly, their ministry is shared with all believers, that universal priesthood idea.
Crucial point.
Hmm.
Though they do have specific responsibilities, especially celebrating the sacraments and providing pastoral leadership within the circuit structure.
And finally, they're accountable to the church's structures, its discipline, and its ethical expectations.
Exactly. It's a multifaceted, deeply responsible, and vital role within the life of the Methodist Church.
This deep dive, drawing on the Book of Order, really gives us that solid foundation for understanding.
Hopefully it provides helpful clarity.
And that leads to a final thought for you listening in. Thinking about all these specific roles and responsibilities we've unpacked, how does that deepen your own appreciation for what Methodist ministers do? And how does it make you think about the interconnectedness of our whole church community? Maybe it even raises further questions for you, perhaps about how ministry continues to evolve today.
Good questions to ponder.
Definitely something to reflect on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.